Krysta makes stuff. That's the end of this song.
Today we're going to talk to you about making COVID-19 respirator type masks. I came up with this design myself. It uses a couple interesting materials. So this is the roll of white ball material made out of Hydroknit. This roll is giant. I think it cost about 60 bucks, but it has over 800 sheets in it. Basically, this material was tested by this company, and when you double up the material will block 93% of 0.3 micron particles that are going to go through it otherwise. So the other interesting material that I use in my masks are a non-fiberglass HEPA filter. The one that I used is a Honeywell high allergen blocking filter. It's polyester batting with a proprietary coating on one side. And this is what came out of the HVAC filter. So again, non-fiberglass, so it shouldn't be harmful as far as I can tell. And these filters are around $17. You don't need to use this material in addition to the other stuff. White ball should be good enough, but I wanted to be extra safe, and I don't think this is restricting the airflow or any noticeable amount, so I'm using this. A little tour of the mask. It has a nose bridge that is made out of aluminum foil. It's the best that I can find to make the nose bridges because they're usually made out of aluminum. Getting started, I had many iterations of my masks before I came up to this design. Here are several of the different patterns that I was creating. I think I'm at Rev 6 or 7 at this point with my current state of the mask. This white ball material is actually really great for crafting and pattern making as well, because it doesn't, it's relatively cheap. It's really easy to cut. It doesn't fray because it's a paper product, but it's very sewable like fine cotton. So, if you're making patterns and you want to rip out the stitches a whole bunch of times and then sew it again without it fraying, it's a great material for that. So it's really cool. So yeah, once I came up with my pattern, I ripped it apart and I traced it. There's a couple different patterns that I'm using. Really, these are the only two that you need to make the mask. This is the primary pattern that you trace on the folded over sheet first, and then you sew along, I guess this is the top, you sew along the top here, and you sew along the bottom here, and then you turn it inside out so that those primary stitches on the top and the bottom are on the inside. And with that, the HEPA filter will be on the inside too. And then once that's sewn and flipped inside out, I sew along the edges here to sort of close it in to make it easier to line things up in the next step. The next step, I take the second pattern, trace out the cuts, 5 cuts here, and then I cut those out, and then I fold these over and then sew up the seams, and that's pretty much it. So I'll go through the process now so you can see what it's like to make this mask. So getting started, my step number 1 is generally to make the nose bridge, and we're making that out of aluminum foil that's folded over. So this is standard Reynolds wrap aluminum foil first. So I tore it this way, so I want to make strips this way, the non-cut way for consistency. The easiest way I've found to cut these strips is with an aluminum or steel ruler and just ripping down the seam. That works really well. It's a lot easier and more consistent than cutting with any sort of scissors. So The first step is cutting a piece that is about 3 inches wide, 2.5, 3 inches wide. And I will rip that piece off carefully. And look at that. Perfect, perfect. This is the right tool for this job. So next I have this piece, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold it in half. Doesn't have to be perfect. Fold it in half so it's doubled up, and then just start rolling. So you fold over maybe less than 1/4 of an inch, and then you just keep folding and folding and folding up until the end. So if you have some kids or someone who doesn't know how to sew, and you want to make these masks, there's several steps in this process that are really easy to offload to different people, and this is one of the steps that you can do that. So this is what it looks like in the end. That's a very suitable nose bridge. It bends really easily and it keeps its shape. So yeah, so this is a great material for making these nose bridges. So the next step in the process is to take one of these white ball pieces, trace the pattern basically. First you fold it in half. So here's the serrated part. So I'm folding it so the serrated parts are touching each other. So I'm folding it in half and I'm creasing the bottom. And then the next thing that I do is I take this pattern and then I lay it down on the material. I center it just for fun. And then I take a blunt pencil and I just trace around it. Just so you know, this has been found to be 2 to 3 times more effective than cotton masks, just because the size of the effective knit is much finer. So yeah, so here you have the design laid out on the cloth. So at the point after you've traced around your folded over piece, that's when you also want to take out your HEPA filter and find a nice section of that, and then trace your pattern into the HEPA filter as well. With this, I'm going to be tracing with a permanent marker, just because this material is a little bit more difficult to deal with. It is not like paper, it is like polyester batting. Perfect. And then cutting out that shape. You don't want to waste this material. This is, of the materials we're using, this is probably the most expensive per square foot. Not counting the crazy markup that there is these days on the elastic band that I'm still waiting on in the mail for using around ears. So we got the polyester batting cut. And now what I'll do is I will lay this in the appropriate direction on top of my folded over piece of Hydroknit with the polyester batting side down. And then I will go to my sewing machine and sew the top and the bottom. Here's the pattern, here's the top and the bottom. Sewing along here and along here. So there you go. That's it sewn together. Then from there, I will take my shears and then cut around the edge of the pattern. There you go. The next step in this process is turning this inside out very carefully. So when we're turning this inside out, we don't want to be turning it inside out with the batting. Just the Hydroknit material should be on either side and the batting should be in the middle. So you grab it so that the batting is like that. And then just turn it inside out very carefully. The stitches aren't locked at this point, so you just sort of have to finagle it. Great. So the next step in the process is to put in the aluminum foil nose bridge at the top. So that's what we'll do next. So to put in this nose bridge, you just basically shove it inside the mask at the top. So I just feel around and try to center it the best I can in the mask over where the nose is supposed to be, and that seems pretty good. So the next thing I do is bring it to the sewing machine. Okay, stitching around the nose bridge now, just going slow. When I need to turn a corner, I stop it, I lift it up, I turn, and then I start it again. If you're better at using sewing machines than I am, of course, you can go more quickly than I'm going. I don't claim to be good at sewing. So I hit the edge again, so I stop it, I'll lift up the foot, I'll rotate it, and then I'll keep going. And then at the end, I'll lock the stitch a little bit by going backwards a few stitches, and then I'll cut, because I have a fancy sewing machine, and there you go. Not the prettiest thing, but is functional. I'm getting better each time, in theory. So the next step in making this is sewing along the bottom just to sort of lock this more flat, and then sewing along the sides. Increase my sewing machine speed back up. You can sew along the bottom and the sides in one continuous stitch if you're more forward thinking than I am. So there you go. But Krysta, it looks like this, you're saying. What about all these notches? Well, that's the next step. I have you sew up the sides before you cut the notches, so that when we sew these together, like that and like this, so it becomes the mask shape, these ends don't fall apart. So at this point, we line up our pattern that is from one of the first steps with what you got so far, and then you take your pencil and then you trace along the cut marks. When you're doing this tracing, it's really never going to be perfect. There's a lot of variability, but you know, try to follow it as close as you can. It's the best we can do. Okay, now we cut out those notches. There you go, it's coming together. So the next thing that we do is we choose a front. And you choose the front based on where this, which side has the soft polyester batting, and this is going to be the outside because it's not the fuzzy part. So that's going to be the outside and this is going to be the inside. I'll be folding like that and then sewing along this seam. So I like to use the back sew feature on my sewing machine to sew a few back stitches to lock it in before I sew forward. And then I get to the end, and again I'll do a few back stitches. Then cut and repeat. This is actually one of those crazy embroidery sewing machines, so it can embroider like Winnie the Pooh and letters and all that kinds of stuff, but turns out embroidery software is really expensive and just not that useful. So I pretty much only use it for like straight stitching. The nice thing about this sewing machine though is that it cuts the thread for you, which you never know, like you wouldn't believe how useful it was until you had a sewing machine that did that, and then you'd be like, oh my god, I'm never going to go back to a traditional old school sewing machine. Okay, so there you go. There's the mask. And that's pretty much done. There's only a couple other things, like I'll go through and I'll cut all the loose threads off. If you had a little bit more foresight than I did, and did more continuous stitches, there would be less of this wispies. So you notice here, I didn't sew quite enough, so you can see some of the HEPA filter through. No problem. I'll just turn that back inside out and then sew along this line just a little bit further in, and then that'll be perfect. So there you go. It's almost done. There's just one more thing that I like to do, is I like to sew along these edges. Sometimes it doesn't quite line up perfectly at the end, so I'll just snip that straight off. It's not going to fray because this material doesn't fray. And then, yeah, clean up some of these wispy thread ends. So there you go. That's the mask. It looks pretty good. It fits my face really well. You just adjust the nose bridge by pressing on it. The one last thing to do is attach your favorite type of straps. It seems to be pretty safe. My glasses don't really fog up much when I'm wearing it, so that's a good sign. It's not affecting my breathing at all. With this, it seems to be a really good, relatively simple mask. Not infinitely reusable, but certainly you can reuse this a few times. And like I said before, the best way to sanitize these, in my opinion, doing research, is you don't want to throw them in a washing machine or anything, especially with the polyester batting. So go get some Everclear from your essential workers at your essential liquor store, and or some isopropyl alcohol if you have it, but it's pretty rare these days. And make sure it's about 70% diluted alcohol, which is what Everclear generally is, like 151 proof, or is perfect. Put some in a mason jar, put your masks in the mason jar, shake it up, and pull it out and let it air dry, and it should be good for many uses. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial video. I will include links to my patterns in the description and links to the white ball material. I'm not going to give you links to aluminum foil and a link to the specific HEPA filter, or the closest that I could find online that I used. Of course, you don't need to use the HEPA filter. It just adds cost. If you just want to double or triple up the Hydroknit material, then that's probably great as well, just in itself. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that. Hope to see you again soon.